Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 15 game-by-game preview edition. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to, again, go through all 32 teams ahead of round one of the fantasy playoffs, giving you at least one cool thing along the way. Of course, the man joining me to accomplish this important task, the one, the only, Matthew Freedman. Happy Wednesday, Freedman.
Yeah, happy Wednesday. Week 15. I'm already looking ahead to week 16, to be honest, starting to get stuff outlined. But man, this is such a fantastic time of the year. Guillotine leagues are now down to 4 teams. And in a lot of other leagues, you've got the postseason going in full effect. So it's just a fantastic time. And then Christmas is almost here. So, just an absolute wonderful time of the year. And of course, I'm a wet blanket and a Grinch, but still, even I acknowledge it's a great time of the year.
A lot going on, a lot of potential distractions out there. So let me just remind all of you attempting to win that fantasy championship, no excuses, play like a champion. And with that, let's get into the show with our DraftKings opening lines. Plenty of injuries to get through, guys. But first, a Lamar Jackson update that actually isn't injury related. No, he was not at practice on Wednesday, but it actually was due to a non-injury related rest day. So I guess you could say that's a step in the right direction. He did seem to be moving with a bit more burst there last Sunday than we have seen in previous weeks. So hopefully Lamar getting healthier when it matters most. Also note in the QB streets, Jaden Daniels out for week 15 with that left elbow injury. Will be Marcus Mariota under center ahead of that matchup against the Giants. We also have Geno Smith unlikely to start in week 15. Kenny Pickett will be under center. Freeman, not that we overly care about the Raiders passing game, but that caused you to change the projections in a meaningful way for Brock Bowers because just, as someone who's not exactly under the hood as much as you're at the projections, I would think at this point, based on what we've seen from Geno in the year 2025, we're pretty much treating Bowers and Genty the same way.
Yeah, relatively little change. The drop from Geno to Kenny Pickett worth maybe about a point in terms of the overall spread, and that doesn't make too much of a difference in terms of the total projection. So yeah, I think it's pretty much quote unquote business as usual for Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers, and unfortunately, business is not that good.
9 freaking targets over the last 2 games for Brock Bowers. 3 touchdowns, which is cool. He's really good at football. Maybe let's just throw him the ball a little bit more. Maybe in a revenge game special against the Eagles, Kenny Pickett can do just that. Also note Jets quarterback Tyrod Taylor and Justin Fields starting off the week with DMPs. Brady Cook getting all the first team reps and sadly could be in line to start for any of us hoping for an AD Mitchell big game. Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence limited with an ankle issue. Doesn't seem like too big of a concern. Also note that Colts head coach Shane Steichen did say that Philip Rivers could start independent of Riley Leonard's status. Leonard was actually practicing in full on Wednesday, so maybe not as banged up as we believed. But yeah, I would be kind of surprised if Rivers is ready to go. If he isn't starting, I would guess by week 16 at the latest. Over in the running back streets, good news for Giants running back Tyrone Tracy had that whole bye to get healthy, and he is seemingly a full go. Practicing full, dealing with that hip injury. We are expecting him to take his usual RB1 role ahead of Sunday's matchup against the Commanders. Nick Chubb day-to-day with a rib injury, not going to change the status of Woody Marks all that much anyway. However, we do have a handful of DMPs in those running back streets. Breece Hall, Chris Rodriguez, and Alvin Kamara all not practicing. And also note Trey Benson was not activated from the IR. His season is now over. Freeman, if we don't see Breece Hall out there, it would be Isaiah Davis. If we don't see Chris Rodriguez, Bill Crosby-Merritt would get the Giants matchup. And of course, Devin Neal's already been doing his thing in New Orleans. If we did see Isaiah Davis or the artist formerly known as Bill actually get that starting job, do you see either of those guys still cracking your top 24?
No, I don't. And I will say I'm not too worried about it. Guys who missed practice on Wednesday but still played the week before and didn't exit early with an injury, I generally think they're going to suit up. So we just have to see the practice reports. And if Breece Hall misses consecutive practices, then I start to worry a little bit. But I don't really even want Chris Rodriguez near my lineup right now, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll talk about more a little bit later, but he is firmly in that kind of gross RB3 flex. Kind of wish I had someone better to start here, but sometimes you got to make do with what life gives you. Some good news in the wide receiver streets. Both CeeDee Lamb and T. Higgins somehow, I'm very surprised on this one, started off the week with limited practices. So they are still in the concussion protocol. It's not a given that they are going to play, but just typically with the concussions, guys, you do want to see them progress to that limited practice by at least Thursday. So the fact that they're on Wednesday gives them time to hopefully get upgraded to a full and then clear concussion protocol, obviously, if they are good to go. Drake London, however, out for Thursday night. He has now missed 4 straight games despite being called day to day. That's just so freaking cool. Freeman, love getting these sort of updates from coaches and how just accurate they wind up being. That said, good news from the Buccaneers. Mike Evans is expected to play. Okay, he's officially questionable with the collarbone. That said, again, he has been activated off IR, and just based on what Todd Bowles said about Evans has shown everything he needed to show in practice to get activated and make his return. We are expecting Evans to be out there. We'll see about Jalen McMillan. That said, Freeman, we did actually see a nice quote pulled from Coach Speak Index. Shout out OC Josh Grizzard last week when asked about Evans when being on a pitch count said, quote, "I think so," and said it would be in the same game plan as Chris Godwin and Bucky Irving potentially. So I was a little more bullish on Evans in the thought that, okay, it's a collarbone. Like, he still had a chance to keep his legs fresh and stuff despite being on IR. After hearing that, though, man, I did move Evans down to more so like wide receiver 36 range as opposed to someone who needs to be in the lineups.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. And I'll just say kind of quickly in passing about the Drake London being day-to-day and missing his 4th straight game. There are some coaches who seem to get injury information wrong, and it's almost – let me rephrase this. Sometimes you don't know when coaches say something about injuries, and it's like the sign that they're sharp. And then sometimes coaches will say something about injuries, and it's a little bit misleading, and it's the sign that they're definitely not sharp. And I feel like when it comes with the Falcons, we have a sign of that being very much in the not sharp category.
Yeah, I would also go with the latter in that one. Also note, guys, Josh Palmer and Parker Washington back to limited practices after missing some time, respectively, there. Kyle Pitts questionable for Thursday night. He has been limited all week, so I'm tentatively still expecting him to play. Without Drake London, guys, he is a legit top 6 tight end in our Fantasy Life consensus ranks. Also note, Cade Otton is doubtful for that game. I really hope you weren't planning on playing Cade Otton anyway. Finally, the Colts did place cornerback Charvarius Ward, on IR. He did suffer his 3rd concussion of the season. Get better soon, Mr. Ward. And then probably the biggest one, I want to save the best for last, guys. The Eagles have unfortunately removed the positivity rabbit from their locker room. So 0-1 with it in there. It's very unfortunate. I would like to think there could be a bigger story behind this. I really want, can Pablo Torres find out the entire story about the positivity rabbit from start to finish? Because I do think there could be a market for that. So end of an era. We'll see maybe if they can bring it back here by the end of the year. But for right now, it is in fact gone. So that has been our DraftKings opening lines. Let's get into the show, guys. But first, a quick word to those friends at DraftKings. I teamed up with DraftKings Sportsbook to bring you the best way to get in on the action this NBA season. Right now, new customers who bet just $5 will get $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's right, new customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And hey, use your bonus bets on same-game parlays, player props, money line spreads, and more, or stay on the action with live betting that brings every play to life. So here's your play. New customers turn $5 into $200 if your bet wins, paid out in bonus bets. The crown is yours. Thanks to DraftKings Sportsbook for sponsoring this. Let's make this NBA season one to remember. Note that minimum minus 500 odds are required. The Fantasy Life Show, breaking down every Week 15 matchup. Freeman and I go back and forth, giving you at least one cool thing about each and every team along the way. Starting off with Thursday Night Football, we do have the Buccaneers hosting the Falcons as 4.5-point home favorites. Game total resting at a middling 44.5. Looking at those Buccaneers, guys, what a drop-off it has been for Emeka Egbuka. The victory laps were flying in weeks 1 through 5 as he was working as a wide receiver 3 in all of fantasy football. Since then, though, just 8.9 PPR points per game, the wide receiver 7. So I really wish there was an easy answer, a easy problem to point to, but I think it's a mix of things. I think it's Emeka Egbuka tied for the league lead in drops with some other ballers like Devontae Adams and CeeDee Lamb. So not just that. Also Baker Mayfield, unfortunately, guys, I believe playing through probably some pain that we don't know the full extent of, simply hasn't been himself though. And when you start looking at the leaderboards and some of these efficiency metrics, guys, seeing him ranked way too close to 30th for my liking. After a start that again, legitimately had him in the MVP conversation. So I did go back and watch all their incompletions. And once I was done getting the blood out of my eyes and everything, I did actually count 5 different potential touchdowns since week 7. And just based on my unprofessional opinion, I would say 1 to 2 of them were firmly on Egbuka. The other 3, though, I would again put more of the blame at Baker Mayfield. So maybe getting Mike Evans back is going to help just clear out the entire offense for Egbuka and Chris Godwin to work in the intermediate areas of the field better. And I could see that happening. But for right now, guys, with the fantasy season on the line, we can't completely just assume Egbuka is going to go back to working as that wide receiver 1. So in our consensus consensus ranks, we do have Ibuka as our wide receiver 25. That is ahead of guys like Christian Watson, Cortland Sutton, Brian Thomas Jr. However, is behind the Stephon Diggs, Jawan Jennings, and Lab McConkey's of the world. As I mentioned with Mike Evans, my wide receiver 36, he is still ahead of some of the Colts wide receivers. A.D. Mitchell, the guy's dealing with huge quarterback problems, but certainly doesn't need to be jammed in the lineups. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 33. Yes, he is ahead of Mike Evans for meow. Freedman looking at those Falcons. Mentioned it before, Kyle Pitts is questionable, but not really worried about him playing in this game. And if he does, in fact, suit up, wheels up, man. This guy's been on fire lately.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts has practiced every day this week. So even though he's been limited, I'm not really too worried. I think it's a little bit more of maintenance. And, as we talked about earlier, Drake London with that knee issue has missed the past 3 weeks. In his absence, Pitts has 197 yards receiving on 15 catches, 23 targets, a 92% route rate, 28% target share, and 37% share of the air yards. He's the number 4 tight end in Whopper, which is a metric that kind of looks at air yards and the total opportunity that you're giving or getting, number 4 on the season. So, Kyle Pitts, I wouldn't say like it's been a total renaissance for him, but this year is closer to what we would have wanted to get out of Kyle Pitts at the very beginning of his career than what we've seen the past few years. And then the matchup against the Bucs is friendly. Strong safety Tyke Smith is doubtful to play. He exited last week with a neck injury, so you could have Kyle Pitts going against a backup safety for a lot of the game, and obviously I think that's a great situation.
Yeah, a stat that kills me is in these 4 Kirk Cousins starts, Kyle Pitts has 32 targets. And second place is Darnell Mooney, all the way down there at 16. So legit working as a number 1 pass game option in Atlanta for the moment. Moving on, guys, going to be starting out again the highest game totals and working our way down to the lowest. And accordingly, we got the Rams hosting the Lions as 4.5-point home favorites. Game total all the way up there at 55.5 in this one. So I did want to try to just look at Jared Goff and say, where does he stack up? Again, and obviously, one of the, you can just say, the most important fantasy matchup of the season so far. And right now, guys, he has our consensus QB 11. That is ahead of Trevor Lawrence, Marcus Mariota, and Baker Mayfield, just behind Brock Purdy, Jackson Dart, and Patrick Mahomes. So I would just say when you do look at this Rams defense on the surface and real life, like they are awesome, but I don't think they're so good that we have to be, legitimately scared about Goff or the other obvious playmakers in Detroit. Over the course of their last 5 games, we have seen Bryce Young throw for 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. Mac Jones had 310 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also, Jacoby Brissett last week, 271 yards and a pair of scores. So, yeah, some of that was more so in garbage time, particularly for Brissett. But, hey, those points count the same in fantasy land, so I'm not going to be overly picky about it. So, did do a better job against the Buccaneers in Seattle. But, again, when you do see the Rams standing as number 2 defense in EPA allowed per drop back, pretty big gap between them and the Houston Texans. So wouldn't exactly be freaking out. Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and of course, Jahmyr Gibbs should be in lineups of all shapes and sizes. Freeman, similar sentiment over there for the Los Angeles Rams, man. Pick a player, pick a position. It's someone that we probably want to have in our fantasy lineups. Even some of the, not so usual suspects like Blake Corum and Colby Parkinson.
Yeah, I mean, literally everyone. It's like in DFS, this is just like stack as many players as you can. And in your, normal, like quote unquote, normal fantasy leagues, just like anyone who is wearing a Rams jersey, decent chance you want to put that guy in your lineup. You have Matthew Stafford in the hashtag revenge game going against the Lions. The Rams, by the way, number 2 in implied team total on the week with 28.5 points. Stafford, the odds-on favorite at this point to win the MVP. He has a position high top 5 fantasy finishes this year. And then the Lions in the secondary could be without 3 starters. Cornerback Terrion Arnold definitely out on IR. Strong safety Brian Branch had the unfortunate Achilles injury last week. And then free safety Kirby Joseph has not played since week 7. So great situation for Matthew Stafford. You mentioned Blake Corum. A great situation for him in terms of like, hey, if Kyren Williams were ever to suffer an injury, Blake Corum might be an instant league winner. But even if that never happens, Corum is like actually taking a significant chunk of the workload from Kyren Williams. Since the week 8 bye, they have split goal line carries as a home favorite. Double-digit touches could easily happen with Blake Corum again. And then Colby Parkinson, number 1 tight end Tyler Higbee has been out. Parkinson last week had a 71% route rate, a 25% share of end zone targets. And in the 6 games since the week 8 bye, Parkinson has actually turned into something of like a red zone weapon. He has 4 touchdowns in those 6 games. And again, the Lions could be without their 2 starting safeties. Great situation for Colby Parkinson going against backups.
Yeah, since week 10, Colby Parkinson randomly been the tight end 5. So not so much randomly. Tyler Higgin's out of the picture, but guess what? He's out of the picture for at least another week. We'll see if Colby can stay hot. Moving right along, we got the Bengals hosting the Ravens. Baltimore 2.5-point road favorites. The game totals all the way up there at 52. So looking at the Bengals, again, Burrow, Chase Brown, we are loving all these guys. But I did want to try to look at things if T. Higgins doesn't play. Again, the fact he was limited on Wednesday shocked me because I was honestly probably more expecting them to be telling us they were putting him on season-ending IR, given the fact he has now suffered 2 concussions in a span of 3 or 4 weeks. But maybe he does play. If not, it would be a nice little boost for Mike Gesicki and Mitchell Tinsley. Enough to actively make you bench your better players for them? I don't think so. I think Gesicki probably gets more into mid-tier tight end 2 land because unfortunately, even with T. Higgins out of the picture in recent weeks, we just haven't seen them fully willing to move that route rate up into that 60-70% range, where again, we could be feeling better about the guys. So they got Noah Fant, Tanner Hudson. They like keeping these other tight ends involved. So as much as it does seem like Burrow and Gesicki have a nice connection, he still would be, again, just mid-tier tight end 2 with the Aronde Gadsens and Hunter Henrys of the world. Mitchell Tinsley in this last matchup on Thanksgiving, guys, actually did have a lot of good fantasy-friendly opportunities. One of the top unrealized air yards of the week and 9 total targets. The problem is he didn't make much out of pretty much any of them, okay? So as much as I think him and Andre Yoshivas would both be in that wide receiver 55, wide receiver 60 range, let's face it, it's probably just going to be a situation where we see Jamar Chase get as many freaking targets as he can handle. So more so just, again, worrying about the big stars in Cincy. I did pick up Mitchell Tinsley in my 3-2 team league playoff, guys. So if you're like me and you are desperate, then go ahead there. But I'm guessing more leagues than not going to need to worry about it. Freeman, looking at those Ravens, again, hopefully we're getting a healthier Lamar Jackson, which in turn would be good news for Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers.
Yeah, Derrick Henry has really been the engine of this offense. And the offense is kind of stagnated, but since the week 7 bye, Henry has 692 yards and 6 touchdowns. Just 2 weeks ago against the Bengals, he had 104 yards and a touchdown, even though the Ravens lost 32-14. Obviously, no running back, Justice Hill. Keaton Mitchell is also dealing with a knee injury, so you could really see Derrick Henry get a large workload going against a Bengals defensive line, which could be without multiple players, specifically Trey Hendrickson. And then Zay Flowers, man, he was so bad against the Bengals 2 weeks ago. 7 targets, converted that just to 6 yards receiving. But last week he rebounded 126 yards. And in his 10 games this year with Lamar Jackson as the starter, 746 yards. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1, but with his type of production, at some point he's going to find the end zone. I like both of those guys this week.
And with that, guys, plenty of more games to get to. First, though, it's time for our Cuso Cuts segment. Guys, Cuso's and Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life are starting up for the No Bad Beats, No Bad Meats campaign, again for the fantasy playoffs. And here are the 3 worst bad beats that we received in this past week. First up from Corey, he actually started the season 8-0 and then finished on a 5-game losing skid and missed the playoffs at 8-5. Actually dove into the numbers as we all do when we actually end up missing the playoffs. Unfortunately, or losing the game, only missed the playoffs by a total point scored of 7 points. I'm sure all those, again, seemingly minuscule lineup decisions from the season just flashing before your eyes at this moment. Also from Scott, guys, he lost by 0.6 last week in a potential division clinching game when Younghoe Koo decided to not kick the ball on a field goal attempt. That point was the difference. And that just leads me to, again, suggest, Scott, that, yeah, don't play in leagues with kickers. Otherwise, this is what you get, man. And that sentiment is also true for our guy Malik, who was ahead by 5.5 points going into OT of the Chargers-Eagles on Monday Night Football. Opponent had Dicker, who was, again, going nuts. He put up to 5 points on the 50-yard field goal. He had Jalen Hurts, and that 4th interception actually ended up making him lose. Couldn't survive his own quarterback. So again, Freedman, 2 of these 3 hellaciously bad beats had to do with kickers. I think everyone at this point knows my stance on kickers, but let's face it, man, you are a little bit more of a rational, level-headed individual at times. How do you feel about kickers in fantasy football, Freedman?
I love kickers. Just draft the good kickers. Problem solved. If this guy had Dicker instead of his opponent, he would be in the playoffs.
Wow. Freeman with absolutely no sympathy. Luckily, the people at Cuso's Cuts do have plenty. So, guys, enjoy, again, your free Cuso's all-natural seasons and sauces as a result of your unfortunate bad beats. But, hey, guys, remember that while these bad beats suck, luckily for you, you are winning some free Cuso's. And luckily for everyone else, you can submit your bad beats this week, as next week we will actually reveal the grand winner of the annual supply of Cuso's seasonings. Legit, guys, 365 days worth of Cuso's seasonings and sauces. How can you not love that? Submit submit your stories today by scanning the QR code here or find the link in the description. Again, great opportunity to, unfortunately, just turn your bad fantasy luck into some Cuso seasonings. Can't say enough good things about it. Really has helped bring my grill game to another level. So make sure you, again, scan that QR code here or find the link in the description to hopefully win a full year supply of Cuso seasonings. We are breaking down every Week 15 matchup here on the Fantasy Live Show. Moving right along, Freedman, with the Patriots hosting the Bills. Buffalo 1-point road favorites here. Game total at 49.5. So I just want to ask the question, can we overly trust any non-QB or running back in Buffalo? And I think the answer is pretty much no, guys. All right, Dalton Kincaid is not in our circle of trust at tight end. Actually saw Dawson Knox be the man that was relied on a bit more last week. Would it make sense that, could we see Kincaid in the second game back from injury get a bigger role? Yes. Still just a tight end 10, someone that I would not be starting ahead of guys like Kyle Pitts, Harold Fannin, even maybe a Mark Andrews going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, just with Khalil Shakur, the wide receiver 32 for us. So again, hopefully the Patriots can bring out more of a pass-first approach from the Bills. But guys, he's still only ahead of people like Luther Burden, Jerry Jeudy, Alec Pierce. He's still behind the likes of Chris Godwin, Deebo Samuel, Brian Thomas Jr., and Cortland Sutton. So again, just wild to have the reigning MVP, one of the best quarterbacks on the planet, in a perennial high-scoring offense, and there's one guy in the entire offense that we can overly trust. So, hey, hopefully you have Josh Allen and James Cook. Otherwise, you're not going to be going out of your way to play any of these Bills. Meanwhile, with the Patriots, Freedman, not too different of a situation. Drake Maye is obviously doing his thing, and he deserves to be in the top 5 of anyone's quarterback rankings. But aside from him, not a ton to get excited about. Maybe Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, I will say Drake Maye, obviously you have him, you're starting him coming off of the bye. That offense for the Patriots should be in peak form and going against a defense that could be without starters in all levels of the defense. But yeah, Ramondre Stevenson is obviously someone who has kind of been a thorn in the side of investors in Travion Henderson. And Henderson obviously still the star of that Patriots backfield. But man, in week 13 before the bye, Stevenson actually played ahead of Henderson, a 48% share of the rushes, 58% route rate. I expect both of those guys to get regular usage coming out of the bye. And Stevenson specifically with the between the tackles work against the Bills, kind of intrigued. The Bills number 31 in defensive rush EPA that could be without edge Joey Bosa and linebacker Terrell Bernard, who's dealing with an elbow injury. Stevenson kind of stands out to me as someone that's like a little bit of a desperado play. And then, of course, Mac Hollins in the hashtag revenge game against the Bills. Just had to mention that.
Of course you did. So Stephon Diggs does have a handful of incentives that he could actually reach with a hot stretch here down the end. Obviously had a big first game against the Bills as well. So he is someone kind of along that wide receiver 2 borderline, but otherwise, nothing to get too excited about in this matchup, especially with Hunter Henry again facing the Bills defense that shut down tight ends for the largest portion of this season. Moving on to an NFC East battle, if you can call it that. We got the Giants hosting the Commanders, the New York Football Giants sitting as 2.5-point home favorites, game total of 47.5. So with Chris Rodriguez, guys, I want to bring him up because let's face it, Terry McLaurin's in a good spot, top 20 wide receiver. Marcus Mariota's on that QB1 borderline, but I thought Rodriguez would be the guy who maybe we have some tougher questions about. That said, now he's not even practicing to start the week. So we'll see what the injury report says, but just overall, guys, he's had 11 touches, per game over the course of his last 5 weeks, scored 3 times. Hasn't exactly been crushing it, but has been crushing it seemingly every running back to face off against the Giants. Only the Bengals, in fact, have allowed more PPR points per game to opposing RBs. So with Rodriguez, he comes in as our RB 30. Okay, that is ahead of guys like Kyle Monungai, Tony Pollard, Devin Singletary, and even Ramondre Stevenson. Still behind the Chuba Hubbards, Tyron Tracy's, Aaron Jones, and Kenneth Walkers of the world. If you want to look at Rodriguez as more so a flex play next to wide receivers, we do have him ahead of, again, Michael Pittman, Luther Burden, Khalil Shakur, still behind the Chris Godwin, Deebo Samuel, and Brian Thomas Jr. So I would play Harold Fannin over Chris Rodriguez. Again, this is not a play that I would be suggesting people to go out of their way for, but I know some of you 6 seeds snuck into the playoffs. Maybe don't have the most complete roster in the world. If you do want to try again to maybe steal that round 1 playoff win, maybe Rodriguez can give you the 12 or 13 points that flex spot needs. Freeman, looking at those Giants, another top 20 wide receiver like Terry McLaurin, one Dale Robinson, who I think has earned a lot of respect from people who are just calling him Scam Dale last year. I can't imagine who would do that, Freeman. I definitely didn't say it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, Wan'Dale Robinson has actually progressed this year, like looking much more like a quote unquote competent NFL wide receiver versus a guy who plays just in the slot and gets the ball like 5 yards down the field. In 9 games without number one wide receiver Malik Nabers, he has 83 targets, a couple of carries, 591 yards is what we've seen for him. And then, of course, the Giants offense coming out of the bye, hopefully will maybe kick it into another gear. But even if they don't, the matchup is great. Going against the Commanders, number 32 in defensive dropback EPA, and the Commanders in the secondary without cornerbacks Marshawn Lattimore and Trey Amos, both of whom are on IR. Just great situation for Wan'Dale Robinson.
Wide receiver 20 on the season now. Again, one of the better late round wide receivers, maybe the best late round wide receiver in all of fantasy football. Moving on to another NFC East team on Sunday night. It's the Dallas Cowboys hosting the Minnesota Vikings as 5.5-point home favorites. Game total is at 47.5 there in Jerry World. So looking at the Vikings, I'm a little bit different from the rest of our rankers, guys. I don't trust this Vikings offense, okay? I thought it was a good game from JJ McCarthy last week. She gave him his flowers on our Sunday night review episode. It was the first time that this offense had a passer rating north of 100 with him under center, but still, we're looking at someone with 25 or fewer pass attempts in 5 of his 7 games. He's taken 9 sacks over the course of these last 2 weeks, and just with the way they're dividing things up with a bunch of tight ends involved, not force feeding the ball, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, and Jordan Mason, depending on the week, no one's exactly running away with the backfield. I don't think any Vikings need to exactly be shoved in the starting lineup. So again, just for the record, I'm lower than the other Fantasy Life rankers, and I have gotten over my hissy fit on Monday when I ranked Justin Jefferson as my wide receiver 30. I was still wearing the scars from Sunday. Okay. That's some of the perills of doing your ranks on Monday morning. So I've managed to get him up to wide receiver 24. He's a consensus wide receiver 21. I think it's reasonable to have him ahead of guys like Lab McConkey, Stephon Diggs, Juwan Jennings, and Emeka Ibuka. That said, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jacoby Myers, DK Metcalf, and Terry McLaurin getting the nod over Justin Jefferson. But maybe it is going to be a situation again where this Cowboys defense is just so bad, particularly on the outside, that we see Jettas really get back and finding his form. But since they have, added Quentin Williams, gotten some healthy guys since their bye guys, they're 20th in EPA allowed per drop back, which isn't good, but it is better than the Broncos in that span, actually all the way up there to 15th in success rate. So the Cowboys defense has gone from a complete dumpster fire to just average to bad, and I think that might be enough to be able to shut down the artist known as 9. Freeman, looking at the Cowboys, a lot more to be positive about. That said, we could see CeeDee Lamb sidelined. Again, he was limited to start the week, which is good news, but if he is out, Ryan Flournoy and Jake Ferguson looking like the major beneficiaries.
Yeah, if a guy exits a game with a concussion, I generally assume he's going to miss the next game as well. But CeeDee Lamb going from Thursday, has 3 extra days to where maybe he can clear the concussion protocol. But if he's out, I don't know how much it really hurts the Cowboys offense. You have Ryan Flournoy, who had 13 targets last week with Lamb out, a career high 13 targets, had 115 yards and a touchdown on that. Obviously, you're probably not comfortably starting Flournoy, but maybe if you're a little bit desperate, if you're in Ian's 32 team league, maybe you're starting him. You should definitely add him on waivers. And then Jake Ferguson, we saw earlier in the year what he was able to do without CeeDee Lamb on the field. In 5 games this year, with either Lamb entirely gone or exiting early, Ferguson has 4 touchdowns, 40 targets, 262 yards. The Vikings could be without free safety Theo Jackson, who's dealing with a neck injury. So a great situation for Flournoy and Ferguson if Lamb is out.
Especially Ferguson, guys, he would be inside the top 5, I believe, in our consensus ranks if we do wind up seeing no CeeDee in this one. Moving along, we got the 49ers as 7.5-point home favorites against the Tennessee Titans, game total at 44.5. No, I do not think Tony Pollard is going to replicate his magic in this matchup, okay? He's coming in more so as an RB3. He's in the top 36. You can only move a guy down so low, but man, all right, awesome game and everything, but that was more PPR points than he had in his previous 4 games combined. So I actually do think there's a better flex potential play out there, and his name is Chimere DK, who low-key, guys, actually has 4 top 20 PPR finishes in his last 7 games. And yeah, that's been helped by some return goodness, managing to return 2 punts to the house, but also that's part of the package here. So guys, that's actually the same as Emeka Ibuka, T. Higgins, and DK Metcalf have this season. It's more top 20 finishes than Zay Flowers and Tyrell McMillan have on the year as well. So good stuff from DK, and he is set up well against a 49ers defense that ranks dead freaking last in PPR points per game game allowed the slot wide receiver specifically. So ever since the 49ers have lost Fred Warner on top of all the other guys in their front seven, have not been the same beast on defense. I am the highest fantasy life ranker with DK all the way up there at wide receiver 49. So again, please don't go crazy here, but I do think in deeper leagues, flex consideration, DK could be your guy. He's ahead of Keenan Allen, Pat Bryant, John Mechie, Trey Tucker. Wouldn't it be going crazy enough, though, to get him ahead of the Ricky Pearsalls and Xavier Worthies of the world? Meanwhile, for the well-rested now San Francisco 49ers Freedman, hopefully Brock Purdy is again feeling a little bit more like himself post-bye, because certainly is a matchup that we could expect this passing game to boom against.
Yeah, it's similar to the situation with the Rams, where it's like if a dude is wearing a 49ers jersey, you are probably putting him in your starting lineup. 49ers, number one in implied team total. Brock Purdy coming off of the bye should be healthier. He's at home, where this year he has 251 yards passing versus 215 on the road. The Titans are number 29 in defensive dropback EPOA. So a great situation for him. Jawan Jennings, since he returned to full practice in week 8, he has a 24% target share, 35% air yard share, and 33% end zone target share. I think he should be close to peak capacity off of the bye. The Titans, number 31 in defensive pass DVOA against number 1 wide receivers, and number 1 cornerback Algerius Sneed is on IR. And then, of course, George Kittle, the real star of the passing game here. Since week 8, so shortly after he returned from injury and really ramped up to full capacity, in 6 games, he has a 90 utilization score, which he's turned into 39 targets, 371 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I mean, he should also be in peak form coming out of the bye. All of the 49ers absolutely love them.
As much as the Titans are a bad team and a bad defense overall, they got Devondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons holding down the fort there in the interior. So I think they're kind of one of those teams where they're bad and they almost invite teams to throw the ball a little bit more against them. So agree with Freedman on all accounts there. Guys, plenty more matchups to get to. First, though, a quick word to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Mike's Hard Lemonade is partnering with Matthew Berry and Fantasy Life to give away free weekly prizes all season long, including a trip to this year's big game. These prizes include, again, Fantasy Life Plus subscriptions, gift cards to New Era, Homage, and Knockaround, TV, soundbars, and again, 2 tickets to that big game that happens every year in February. And not only have Fantasy Life and Mike's Hard partner for the sweepstakes, but we've also collaborated on a new 12-pack of exclusive flavors, including Hard Pink Pick 6, Hard Pineapple Rush, Hard Berry Bliss, and my personal favorite, Hard Apple Tackle. So go to www.mikeshard.com/sweepstakes/fantasy-life today. Enter the sweepstakes and go to find Mike's Hard Fantasy Life 12-pack at a store near you. Note that this is for people that are 21 plus only in the age department. Also, it's a premium malt beverage sold by Mike's Hard Lemonade Company in Chicago, Illinois. Moving along as we break down every Week 15 matchup here on the Fantasy Life Show, we got the Broncos hosting the Packers. Green Bay, 2.5-point road favorites in Mile High. Game total resting at 43.5. So want to look at Courtland Sutton because he's been a little bit up and down this season and kind of asked, like, should he be considered an auto start in fantasy? And I think the answer is no, but you probably won't have any better options. He is our consensus wide receiver 27. That is ahead of guys like Brian Thomas Jr., Deebo Samuel, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman, and Khalil Shakur. However, we would be starting the likes of Christian Watson, Emeka Ibuka, Juwan Jennings, Stephon Diggs, and Ladd McConkey ahead of him. So again, on the season, it's not like he's been consistently giving us duds. He's only finished worse than wide receiver 36 in 3 games all year. That said, hasn't had a finish higher than wide receiver 16 since September. So we saw JMO go for, 144 yards and a touchdown against the Packers on Thanksgiving. Of course, a little bit different in how they managed to rack up their yards, with JMO being one of the freaking fastest dudes in the league. So Sutton, again, good, solid flex play, not someone who needs to be shoved in the starting lineups against the Packers defense that, let's face it, has been pretty darn good more weeks than not. Meanwhile, for the Green Bay Packers, Freedman, it's just one of these things, man, where we watch him and you'll see it where Jordan Love really plays great football, but he'll throw a horribly bad interception every once in a while, which I think takes away our overall thoughts of the passing game. But hey, it's been more good than bad recently, and that's also in large part thanks to the contributions of Christian Watson. That said, tough matchup coming up here with a potential shadow day against Patrick Surtain. How are you feeling about Watson in the spot?
Yeah, I'm just excited as a, quote unquote football fan to watch this. And I think we're going to kind of get a pretty good sense of Christian Watson and his capabilities through this matchup. Now, 7 games since he's returned from injury, 452 yards, 5 touchdowns. His usage has picked up over the past 3 weeks specifically in the production with it. 21 targets, 218 yards, and 3 touchdowns since he returned from injury. 38% share of the air yards, 25% share of the end zone targets. Like, he's the number one wide receiver in that offense. And increasingly the gap between him and everyone else is widening. And then now he has this matchup with Pat Surtain, the reigning defensive player of the year, who often shadows opposing wide receivers. So do the Broncos treat him like a legit number one wide receiver with shadow coverage? And do the Packers still go to him as they have been, even with Surtain on him? The matchup of these two players, it might be the most intriguing one that we have all week. And kind of based on how they use Surtain against him and based on how the Packers treat Watson with Surtain on him, I think that's going to tell us a lot about Watson's role within that offense.
And Surtain, even last week, was willing to follow Brock Bowers a little bit into the slot. So it really is a situation where normally in these shadow matches, we don't expect, a full game's worth of, one-on-one matchups, but could be actually pretty close to that this week. If, to Freedman's point, the Broncos do decide Watson is that important. Moving along, we got the Texans hosting the Arizona Cardinals. Houston 9.5-point home. Faves game total at 42.5. Can Jacoby Brissett and Michael Wilson keep it going, guys? Wanting to see what Marvin Harrison Jr.'s status is going to be. Again, both guys could be more so in that wide receiver 3, don't need the stardom range alongside Courtland Sutton if it is a situation where both are active. But if not, guys, which we are projecting in our fantasy life ranks, we do have Michael Wilson as our wide receiver 10 right now, ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, Jameson Williams, and Chris Olave, amongst others. It is going to be a tough task, though, because this year only Jackson Smith-Njigba and Puka Nacua have actually scored north of 20 PPR points against the Texans, and they've even been even tougher on quarterbacks. Josh Allen with 253 passing yards is the only quarterback to clear 250 against Houston this year. Nobody has reached 20 fantasy points just yet. But that said, guys, nobody, including the Houston Texans, has seen what Jacoby Brissett can do down multiple touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Nobody's been racking up garbage time points like Jacoby and, also Michael Wilson over these last few weeks. So we'll see what happens here. Generally, though, Jacoby is our QB 18, not someone who needs to be in lineups the same way as Michael Wilson. Still ahead of Justin Herbert, J.J. McCarthy, and Caleb Williams, but we will be starting the likes of Bo Nix, Toyotathon, Jordan Love, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield ahead of Jacoby Brissett. Meanwhile, Freedman looking at those Texans. Mentioned before, Nick Chubb is considered day-to-day with that rib injury. It could be a chance that we see Woody Marks, having already good volume that actually goes to pretty freaking great in a winnable matchup as a 9.5-point home favorite.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Nick Chubb dealing with that injury. He exited last week, and that opened the way for Woody Marks to have awesome usage. A season high 29 targets, 26 carries, 26 carries and 3 targets, 29 opportunities in total. He hasn't really been efficient with his workload, but if he gets a workload like that, it's really not going to matter, especially as the big home favorite in the Cards could be without defensive tackles Walter Nolan and Bilal Nichols. And then Nico Collins, in 6 games since the Week 8 bye, he has 577 yards receiving, a touchdown receiving, and then another touchdown on the ground. The Cardinals are number 31 in defensive dropback success rate, and cornerback Max Melton missed last week with a heel injury. I think he's probably going to miss again this week. So awesome setup for Nico Collins.
Did actually just get word that Woody Marks joined Nick Chubb on the sidelines officially, and they were both DMPs. Woody obviously had that knee injury that he did seem to re-aggravate during that Chiefs game last week. So let's say Freedman, both of them are out of the picture. Dario Ngumbawale all of a sudden cracking into that, RB 25-ish range. We're not going crazy with it, but dude, I'd probably start him over Chris Rodriguez and stuff.
I suppose so. It would be nasty, but given how good he is in the passing game and that he's actually going to be a pretty significant home favorite, I guess Dare Ogunbowale would be a high-end RB3, which I guess, hey, stuff like that happens this time of the year.
And look, they don't even have Dameon Pierce there anymore to potentially elevate, so it really could be Dari and guys like Britton Brown and Jacob Johnson, being out there as glorified fullbacks. So that would just be very fitting. But as I must remind you guys, Tajay Spears and Amir Abdullah finished as top 8 fantasy backs in the fantasy playoffs last season. So, weirder things have happened potentially than Dari Ogunbowale becoming a thing down the stretch. Moving on to one of the bigger spreads of the week, we do have the Seahawks hosting the Colts as 13.5-point home favorites. Game total out of lowly 42.5 because, yeah, we're going to see either 44-year-old Phillip Rivers or, Riley Leonard under center at this point. So it is good at least that Leonard was able to practice in full. But just, all right, Vegas, guys, don't even take my word for it. Take the people, in the desert's word for it who have to set these lines and have to try to do so with accuracy. Right now, we're looking at the Colts only implied for 14.5 points, okay? That is tied with the New York Jets. That is also only better than the Raiders. The Browns and Titans offenses are projecting to score more points than the Indianapolis Colts this week. So Jonathan Taylor, you're starting because he's Jonathan Taylor. Otherwise, the answer for pretty much anyone involved in Indy is going to be no. So honestly, just the fact that Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce are top 36 wide receivers in the fantasy ranks, I think that's generous. And personally, I even have them a little bit lower. We'll see if that continues to adjust as the weeks go on. But yeah, guys, even Tyler Warren, someone who's sitting as our tight end 8, we will be starting guys like Brenton Strange, Dalton Kincaid, Jake Ferguson, Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts ahead of Tyler Warren. You can't argue he gets the edge over Brenton Strange, Kincaid, and Mark Andrews. But that said, again, someone that we're not exactly going to be feeling great about. So Seahawks, the one, I guess, sort of issue with their defense is they haven't been amazing against tight ends. So Jonathan Taylor, kind of Tyler Warren, these wide receivers, though, miss me with that. Freeman looking at those Seahawks. Yeah, that Jackson Smith and Jigba guy, 200, 300 yards this week. Who can really say?
Yeah, the only thing that is stopping JSN this week is if the Seahawks decide they want Sam Darnold to throw the ball only 10 times in this game. And then even then, JSN would probably still go off. I mean, the dude has been awesome. A position high, 4 top 5 fantasy finishes this year. The number 1 wide receiver in utilization score, obviously leads the league in yards receiving. And then the matchup against the Colts, who are number 4 in largest fantasy boosts allowed to wide receivers, almost certainly going to be without Sauce Gardner this week, and then definitely will be without Charvarius Ward. So missing their top 2 cornerbacks going against JSN. I mean, just absolutely amazing matchup. Again, the only way he doesn't smash is if the Seahawks get out to such a big lead that they just don't need to throw the ball. And unfortunately, that's a possibility.
And I would, for that reason, it's also tough to get behind Rashid Shaheed, even though he did have his best game with the Seahawks last week. Because, again, we know Shaheed's good at football, but only so much good football players can do with legit potentially 1 to 3 targets out there. Moving on to Monday Night Football, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers as 3.5-point home favorites against the Miami Dolphins. Game total of 42.5. This is probably the only potentially bad sort of weather game. And even then, right now, Kevin Roth has it as a yellow and nothing to overly worry about. So there's a lot of games this week that are going to be cold, but luckily looking like no high winds or overly, precipitationally impacted games. So keep that in mind. But for this one, accordingly, Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell are looking like the 2 best options for the Steelers. We like DK Metcalf as a top 20 play as well. But just honestly, guys, over the course of these past 3 weeks, both Warren and Gainwell have been more good than bad. In fact, when you look at it, they're only separated by 0.5 total PPR points. Gainwell actually has the edge, again, over these last 3 games when both guys have been fully healthy. So I think over the course of the rest of the season, I still would take Warren. He was coming back from that injury he suffered in that Bengals game. When we have seen him fully healthy, he has actually taken a bigger overall command of the backfield. But I think both these guys are in play here. Jalen Warren comes in as our RB21 ahead of Amarian Hampton, Rico Dowdle, Devin Neal, and DeAndre Swift, among others. Kenneth Gainwell is someone who Dwayne and I actually have as RB30 and RB31. Freeman and the others a little bit lower on the guy, but I think he, again, deserves to be ahead of the Blake Corum, Dave Montgomerys, and Bam Knights of the world because Kenneth Gainwell, even if Jalen Warren has been the lead back on the ground, Gainwell playing involved as a receiver as well. Freeman looking at those Miami Dolphins, it sounds like Devon Achane will be good to go, but if not, man, wheels up for Jalen Wright.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like all the Jalen's in this game. Jalen Wright, Jalen Waddle, and then the Jalen with the Steelers. But yeah, hopefully Devon Achane can play this week. But, Mike McDaniel is sometimes one of those coaches who's a little too optimistic about the injury status of his players. So if Achane is out, great situation for Jalen Wright, who last week broke loose with 107 yards and a touchdown on 24 carries and 3 targets with Achane exiting the game early. The Steelers defensive tackle Derek Harmon last played in week 12. At a minimum, Jalen Wright needs to be added on waivers. And then Jalen Waddle, I don't think enough credit has been given to him with what he has done in an offense that really hasn't been that good passing the ball, but what Waddle has done since Tyreek Hill went out. In those 9 games, Waddle has a 52% share of the air yards and a 38% share of the end zone targets, which he's converted into 627 yards receiving, and then 4 touchdowns. The Steelers are number 6 in most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Even with weather that isn't going to be great, and in a pass offense that isn't great, Jalen Waddle is still looking pretty dominant.
Hey, 6-7 Dolphins, 6-7 Kansas City Chiefs, Freedman. We'll see, man. Things are starting to get a little spicy. Haven't officially been eliminated just yet. This will be a tougher matchup than what they've been seeing recently. Either way, though, kudos to the Dolphins for staying frisky when it sure seemed like they were ready to pretty much roll over earlier in the season. Moving on to the Jaguars hosting the New York Jets. Jacksonville sitting as 12.5-point home faves. Game total starting to get a little bit low now. We're at 41.5. Does AD Mitchell still deserve flex consideration if Brady Cook is under center? Absolutely not, guys. Let's face it, at the end of the day, we've seen 3 games from AD Mitchell where he has had under 45 scoreless yards. One cool game with 102 yards and a touchdown, but even then, all right, as much as I do think AD Mitchell is good at football, he got a touchdown when the cornerback fell down about 40 yards downfield. A lot of just ho-hum out routes from Tyrod Taylor otherwise. So, look, if Tyrod's back or Justin Fields, I do think we can look at AD Mitchell as a borderline wide receiver 3, maybe a high-end wide receiver 4 flex candidate. The problem is what we did see from Brady Cook in a tough situation was some of the worst quarterback play in the league this year. We're talking about numbers that are on par with Max Brosmer, a hilarious, guys, minus 18.2% completion percentage over expected. I cannot even remember seeing a mark that bad, albeit small sample size, but yeah, not too much confidence here in Brady Cook, and that's why Vegas has them again as a consensus bottom 3 offense in the league ahead of this spot. So Breece Hall, again, keep an eye on that practice designation. Isaiah Davis, though, would not exactly be a must-start running back in his absence. Still someone, though, that would be knocking on that RB26, RB27 door, if you will. Meanwhile, for the Jaguars, Freeman, playing some good ball, man. I feel like Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams and company in Chicago, deservedly so, have gotten a lot of flowers. They were the number 1 seed in the NFC before last week. But Jaguars, man, I don't want to call them a sleeping giant or anything because they haven't exactly been facing the toughest schedule recently, and they aren't Sunday as well. But we started to see some good things from Trevor Lawrence in particular over the last few weeks.
Yeah, Lawrence has played his best ball of the past 2 games at 9.7 adjusted yards per attempt mark. He's also been decent as a runner, 41 yards on the ground. And then the matchup, man, the Jets secondary is like uglier than abstract art. Like they traded away their top cornerbacks. And then after those guys, they could be down 4 starters. So great setup for Lawrence when he's playing his best ball of the season. And then Travis Etienne, since the week 8 bye, he's had 6 games. In those games, 504 yards and 6 touchdowns. The Jets are number 3 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs, and they've really struggled on the ground since trading away defensive tackle Quinnen Williams. So just great absolute matchup spot for basically everyone in that offense, but specifically looking at Lawrence and Etienne.
Guys, 4 more matchups to get through here on the Fantasy Live Show. Next up, we got the Kansas City Chiefs hosting Los Angeles Chargers. Patrick Mahomes and company 4.5-point favorites at Arrowhead. The game total at 41.5. That said, this offense is only implied for 22.75 points. That is the same as the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, for example. So other than Rashee Rice, I don't think anyone needs to be jammed into starting lineups. Patrick Mahomes, of course, as well. But it is just a situation, guys, where don't look now, but this Chargers defense has been playing their best ball as of late since week 8. So just, the second half of the season, I'm not trying to do, a real wonky split on you guys. They're just second best defense in terms of EPA per play and per drop back behind the Seahawks. And honestly, there's a pretty decent gap between those 2 teams and the rest of the league. So Kareem Hunt comes in as our RB32, Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 45, and Travis Kelce, tight end 6. So I'm cool with Kelce in more lineups than not. That said, we do have Kyle Pitts, Harold Fannin ahead of him this week. And I do think that Tyler Warren and Brenton Strange at least have a case to go next to Kelce. So I would take Kelce again ahead of Warren and Strange and even Dalton Kincaid in that conversation. But more than anything, guys, Mahomes, Rice, Kareem Hunt, more of a flex type of candidate this week. And then Kelce, more of a tight end 6, tight end 7 type, as opposed to a top 4, top 5 option firmly in that circle of trust. Meanwhile, for the Chargers, Freeman, it's a situation where, I could see them continuing to play well. Chiefs just have not really earned the benefit of the doubt here. But I do get a little bit worried about them just continuing to survive behind that just such banged up offensive line. How are you feeling about the Chargers as a whole?
Yeah, this is kind of macro. I like the Chargers. The Chiefs favored by 4.5. Our game model leans a little bit towards the Chargers at that number. And the big thing is Justin Herbert is 7-2-1 against the spread in his 10 games against the Chiefs. Since the week 10 bye, so a sample of 4 games, not massive, but since the week 10 bye, the Chiefs defense is number 26 in drop back EPA. If you look at what they did in the first 9 games of the season, 17.7 points allowed is what we saw out of the Chiefs defense. Since the bye, they've allowed 23.3 points per game. They've allowed 20 points in each of the past 4 matchups. Like, this Chiefs defense is gettable. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Cowboys got a lot of hype for beating the Chiefs and the Eagles in consecutive games. The Chargers could do the same thing this week. I mean, and the thing is, they have so many weapons on offense that it's hard to predict who will go off in any given week. But in general, I think the Chargers offense is going to have success.
Moving along, we got the Saints hosting the Panthers. Carolina 2.5-point road favorites, game total at 40.5. And I want to look at this Carolina RB split because I think the idea that Chuba Hubbard is just for sure taking this backfield back over has been a little bit overstated. Okay, so we've had 5 games since Rico Dowdle kind of resumed being the starter in that big game he had against the Packers. In those 5 games, Rico has had 27 touches, 21, 24. In the 2 most recent games, 10 and 20. In those 5 games, again, the first 3, Chuba only had 5, 4, and 5 touches. In the last 2 games, 7 and 10. So again, it has gotten closer over the course of these last 2 games. We're talking about 30 touches for Rico and then 26 for Chuba, but I still do think they recognize Rico as a starter right now, and I'm not exactly going to be ranking Chuba ahead of him. So we have squeezed a split in the ranks. Rico Dowdle is our RB23, Chuba is our RB29, but it's just one of those things, guys, where I wouldn't exactly assume that Rico is a non-factor. Would also note that the Saints actually have allowed the 3rd most rushing yards to opposing running backs. Only the Bengals and Giants are worse, and this has been one of the single most run-heavy offenses in the entire league all season long. So maybe the answer to Rico Dowdle and Chuba versus Chuba Hubbard in this spot is just, yes, feel good about both of them because, again, the one thing this Panthers offense has been able to do pretty much all season long is run that rock. Freeman looking at the New Orleans Saints. Tyler Shuck, honestly, I think surpassing a lot of people's expectations, and accordingly, that puts his number 1 wide receiver in a winnable spot here against the Panthers.
Yeah, Chris Olave has really looked great since the team traded number 2 wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, and then Brandon Cooks. He wasn't amounting for much, but he's also gone. But without Shaheed, since week 10, Chris Olave has a 91% route rate, 28% target share, 49% air yard share, and 67% end zone target share. Just absolutely unreal stuff. He's converted that into 33 targets for 251 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving. The Panthers are number 28 in defensive pass DVOA against number 1 wide receivers. Playing in the dome, I think Chris Olave has another good game.
2 more matchups here on the Fantasy Live show. We got the Chicago Bears hosting the Cleveland Browns. Chicago 7.5-point home favorites in the game that could, with the wind chill, be looking at sub-zero feel-like temperatures. So it is December football, and accordingly, we got a 39.5-point game total. So keep an eye on the injury report. We actually did see Roman Dunze get back to a limited practice this week. So if he returns, we could feel okay enough about him as a flex option. But honestly, more than anything, I think that would take away some of the allure for guys like Luther Burden and even Colson Loveland in this spot, really just making us focus more on this backfield. So with DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, guys, they've both been pretty darn good ever since we actually saw this backfield start to really centralize around both of them. Okay, so since that Bengals game that Swift missed and Monangai went bonkers in, we've seen Swift actually work as the RB17 in the league in PPR points per game. Kyle Monangai just behind him as the RB19. So with the Browns, I was actually surprised after digging into their data a little bit more to see they haven't been super dominant against running backs from a fantasy sense this entire season. They've been good, but like 13th in terms of, the fewest PPR points per game allowed the position. So it shocked me again to see Tony Pollard go off last week. And it still shocks me to talk about that today, but Pollard had those 28 points. Ashton Genty had 24 points against this group. Derrick Henry had 20. Brees Hall had 19.5. So next 2 high scoring running backs are Jahmyr Gibbs and Christian McCaffrey, but they do that to everyone. Again, it was surprising to me to see Brees, Henry, Genty, and Pollard all go off against this group. Maybe that lack of motivation starting starting to creep in for that Browns defense that, let's face it, other than Myles Garrett, maybe shouldn't exactly be, completely fearful. So Swift comes in as our RB25 on the week. That is ahead of guys like Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones, Tyrone Tracy. But I got more so in RB3, but again, I do think could be looking at 12 to 15 touches, not too shabby for your flex consideration. Meanwhile, for the Cleveland Browns, Freedman, hey, I know you were higher on Jerry Jeudy earlier this year. I was higher on Calvin Ridley. Okay, I'm not trying to say that was a bad call or anything, but the only reason I bring that up is, hey, maybe just a little bit early because Jeudy, big touchdown last week and set up here today. Set up well here this Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I should say monitor the injury report because the Browns could be without literally 4 starters on the offensive line if everything goes wrong. So that could obviously impact the pass game. But assuming some of those guys play, Jerry Jeudy is someone who intrigues me. He had the big touchdown last week. And I'll say Shedeur Sanders and his 3 starts has actually been decent. And Jerry Jeudy, a 92% route rate, 30% share of the air yards in those starts. And then the Bears could be without multiple starting cornerbacks. And then Harold Fannin, of course. I mean, oh, baby. Fannin had a position high 21.4 fantasy points, a career best 114 yards on 11 targets, 85% route rate. Absolutely unreal. 99% utilization score last week. And then you have multiple tight ends, David Njoku and Brendan Bates, who could both be out for the Browns this week. So Fannin, again, could see a huge workload. Just absolutely skyrocketing up the ranks. Harold Fannin, it's hard to think about 5 guys I would rather have ahead of him in a starting lineup this week.
And also, just guys, even if you happen to have one of those few tight ends, like Fannon's very much in flex consideration. Okay, he comes in as our 62nd ranked running back, wide receiver, and tight end overall. That's ahead of guys like Chris Godwin, Chris Rodriguez, Kyle Monungai, Kareem Hunt, Tony Pollard, Michael Pittman, and more. So yeah, God forbid, because his rostership is not as high as you would think. So if he's out there, I like just getting him to block your opponents and maybe even just maybe have a flex option down the line. As always, we save the worst for last here on the Fantasy Life Show. We got the Eagles hosting the Raiders. Philly 11-point home favorites with a week low 38.5-point game total. So Brock Bowers are feeling good there, but trying to figure out how we feel with Ashton Jeanty. I think this could be a spot where he's okay. And the big reason is because this Eagles defense without Jalen Carter has been the opposite of okay. We've seen them now again without their, in my opinion, best defensive player in 3 games. And in those contests, Cam Scatterby went for 31 points. Javonte Williams went for 20.4 PPR points. And then last Monday night, we saw Marion Hampton and Kamani Vidal combined for 25 plus PPR points in their own right. So no, Jeanty doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt with Kenny Pickett under center behind an offensive line that has absolutely sucked this year. But again, 15 to 20 touches projection, against a defense that is missing their best player, you could do worse. So overall, Jeanty, RB19, that is ahead of guys like Woody Marks, Jalen Warren, Omarion Hampton, Rico Dowdle. We do have him behind Breece Hall, Trayvon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and RJ Harvey. However, Freeman, looking at those Eagles, I know a lot of people who drafted Saquon Barkley maybe don't have the privilege of being in their fantasy playoffs, but looked good last Monday night, had a nice house call. Maybe the start of more good things to come because this schedule down the stretch, man, really does look nice.
Yeah, maybe all those people end up winning their consolation bracket. I will say I'm going to be high on Barkley against the Raiders. It's been a down year for him, and he could still end up with 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, which is kind of ridiculous that would be a down year because that could be a career year for almost any running back. But he has 15 opportunities in every game but one. He could really have a heavy workload as a big home favorite. Last week, 122 yards and a touchdown on 22 opportunities. I think he has another really big game this week.
And with that, guys, it's going to do it from us here on the Fantasy Life Show. If you like the show, we always appreciate when you do like the show, and hitting that little subscribe button always helps as well. So for Freeman, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.